Thank you all for joining us. Welcome to today's Northeast CSA Leaders Group Network. I'm really excited to introduce our guest to you today, Juli Ford. She's going to be doing a powerful and deeply needed workshop on multi-generational living. Julie's a nationally recognized expert, speaker, and advocate, helping families navigate the evolving landscape of how we live, care, and connect across generations. Her work focuses on supporting families as they rethink traditional housing models and embrace more integrated, intentional ways of living together. What I really appreciate most about Julie's approach is she doesn't just talk about these different logistics. She brings this really human-centered lens and approach to how to embark upon and engage in these transitions. She understands that multi-generational living is not just a housing decision. It's an emotional, relational, and often identity shifting experience for everyone involved. Today, she's going to help us think differently about what's possible and how we as professionals can better guide the families we serve through these important decisions. Before we welcome Juli, two quick housekeeping items. One, we want to answer as many questions, so feel free to put questions in the chat as we go along. If you have a pressing question in the moment, just raise your hand and I'll make sure to get that question to Juli. And two, if you will be needing a CSA CE for today's program, please make sure you stay to the end. I'll be monitoring attendance. There will be a recording sent out as a follow-up. If you don't stay for the full program, you won't receive a CE, but you can still have access to this amazing content Julie's providing today. So without further ado, welcome, Juli.
Thank you, Erin. Hi, everybody. So nice to meet you all. I really appreciate anybody showing up when it's like 70 degrees in New England. I have not been outside yet today, which is really sad to say. But after this, I certainly will be. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and you can all let me know if you can see that. Can you see my screen, Erin?
Yes, good to go. It's
Okay.
beautiful.
Perfect. Awesome. So I'm so happy to be with all of you today. I am also a certified senior advisor. A little bit of backstory. I worked with Erin at Dovetail Companies for several years, which is where I learned about the Society for Certified Senior Advisors and decided to pursue that myself because I saw how valuable it was in working with older adults. And for the past year, I've been building something different, really focused on multi-generational living and helping families with this other aspect of home and life and relationship and finances. Um, it's funny when Erin said identity shifting, multi-generational living really is identity shifting. And I'll tell you a little bit more about my story. But this picture here is a picture of myself and my daughter and my mom. We have lived in our multi-generational home for 11 years. It'll be 11 years this summer. And this photo was just taken of us by Business Insider, who just did a feature on our family and our story. And side note, it was really nice to get these beautiful photos of our family. But I recently talked with, I spoke at a conference for women in real estate, and I was talking about my story. And afterwards, one of my friends who was there in the audience sent me a t-shirt that I probably should have worn today that just says, I live with my mom, because that's basically my story. Is that I live with my mom. I should probably just wear that every time I do a talk or a workshop because it is identity shifting to like switch back later in your life and live with your parents or your adult kids again. So today we're going to talk about how the families that many of you probably are already serving are at the center of the fastest growing housing trend in America, which I do believe it is the fastest growing housing trend. And we're going to just see that continue to grow. I am the founder and the podcast host for a movement that I've started called Home After 50. I really talk about multi-generational living education, coaching. I have a media platform, and I teach other professionals and agents how to work with multi-generational families. I have been featured nationally because this is such a growing trend, and a lot of media outlets are paying attention. I've been on Fox and Friends and Business Insider and spoken at conferences about multi-generational living because it is something that is just growing so rapidly. As I mentioned, I'm a certified senior advisor. I'm also an end-of-life doula. I primarily got that certification to support my mom, who lives with me as she's aging and nearing the end of her life. But it comes in helpful, as I'm sure many of you who work with older adults would appreciate, as we're helping our clients navigate what often is near the end of their lifetimes. I'm also a real estate broker here in Massachusetts with a national network. I'm a mortgage loan originator. That's just relevant to something else I'll share with you later, which is why I mentioned it. And I've been in the housing industry and real estate field for more than 25 years. I began my career in affordable housing for nearly 20 years and then switched over to residential real estate about 9 years ago, with an overlap in there in case you're doing the math. Um, about a year ago, I decided that it would make a lot of sense if I started talking about my multi-generational home, because every time I would bring up the topic, and every time my mom would bring up the topic with friends or clients or people we ran into about our multi-generational home, everybody was like really, really interested and intrigued. And so many people I discovered were trying to figure out, like, could we do this? What would this look like? Because as I'm sure all of you are fully aware, we have an aging population, we have an elder care crisis, and we have an affordable housing crisis that's deeply affecting everybody in all generations of families, but in particular these days are younger generations who are trying to start households and families of their own. So when I started sharing about my multi-generational experience online, I went viral, which was unexpected. Nobody knew, talking about living with your mother was going to make you go viral on social media, but that's kind of what happened. And I've grown my following on social media over the last year from 1,200 followers to over 100,000 followers now. And more than 9,000 families have downloaded a free multi-generational living guide that I created to help families get started with multi-gen living or just exploring it. Now I've built an ecosystem of tools and resources and solutions for families who are exploring multi-generational living, some of whom are already living multi-generationally and want to figure out how to do it better, and also for the professionals that serve them. So one of the reasons I'm excited to talk with you today is that I believe that families really need more professionals who understand how to support them with the complexities of navigating this beautiful but kind of complicated situation that is potentially a solution to their home needs, their financial needs, and their care needs. So, one of the reasons why I'm talking to you specifically is because if you're a certified senior advisor, you're probably already speaking the language that families really need, more so than many, many other professionals are, especially like in the real estate industry or the financial services industry. You understand aging, you understand caregiver dynamics, family finances, and the emotional weight of big life transitions. And most of the families that I encounter who are exploring multi-generational living, there is one generation in that family who is the older adult, the aging parent. So all of those complexities that we deal with as certified senior advisors are part of the multi-generational living conversation for most families, which makes you really well equipped to be someone who can serve those families well. Um, Probably a lot of your clients are already having conversations about multi-generational living, whether they've brought it up with you or not. So my goal today is to help you elevate your ability to help your clients successfully navigate multi-gen living if that's something that they're interested in. So a few facts, because I just think it's interesting to know, the numbers do tell the story that multi-gen living isn't just a trend. It's really, I believe, a national reset on housing. Today, 60 million Americans live multi-generationally. That's about 18% of all households. It's had a 4x growth in the last 50 years or so, from about 14 million in the early 70s to about 60 million these days. 17% of all home buyers in 2024 were buying multi-gen homes, and 21% of all Gen X buyers were buying multi-gen homes in 2024. I don't have the updated numbers for 2025 yet, but I think that's important to know because, as you can imagine, people my age, I'm 57, are kind of at the center of this conversation. This is Gen X. We're the sandwich generation. And in large part, we're sort of like holding and driving this balance between supporting aging parents and trying to figure out how we're going to help our kids get started in life. 36% of families choose multi-gen living because of cost and affordability, which I'm sure surprises nobody. Home prices in the last 50 years have grown 10 times, while incomes have only grown 6 times. This is a huge part of why it's so difficult for young families to afford to buy a home. I think the average age of the first-time home buyer now is 39 or 40. That's wild, right? That really surprises a lot of people. 25% choose multi-gen living to help care for aging parents. That's probably a conversation that you may already be having with your clients. And 21% choose it because adult children are returning home. You know, college grads facing housing costs, career pivots, life transitions, families needing flexible, dignified space for all generations. So the aging parent reality, I'm preaching to the choir here, I am sure. But you know, your parents are already, your clients are already living in this world where 60 years ago, only 1 in 11 Americans were over age 65. Today, it's nearly 1 in 5. Baby boomers are entering their 70s and 80s, mostly wanting to age in place, ideally near or with family. The sandwich generation, those age 45 to 59 are supporting parents and adult kids, like we just talked about. Assisted living costs. You know, I've got some numbers here that are averages, you know, based upon where you live, that those numbers vary wildly. If you're in Florida or if you're in Massachusetts, even within Massachusetts, assisted living costs can vary wildly depending on the community that people choose. But multi-generational living is often a much more affordable plan for care for families moving forward. But families need professionals who understand the full picture of all of this and not just one piece of it. So, in all of my posting on social media and honestly, millions and millions of views, I think I've had like 27 million views on my content about multi-gen living over the last year. So, as you can imagine, there's a lot of conversation going on in the comment sections, and people really are saying like a lot of the same things. And you can imagine what those are, right? Like, my mom can't be alone anymore. Like, I'm worried about her in the house. I don't think it's working. Or she's super lonely. She's always alone. She's not driving anymore, so she doesn't see anyone. Or my kids can't afford to buy a house. Or my kids can't afford to move back here where they grew up and where they wanted to end up raising their own family after college or after the military or after jobs across the country because they can't afford to buy a house where we live. My parents want to stay at home. Most older adults do want to age in place at home. We need our own space, but we also want to be close. We'll talk a little bit more about that. The issue of space and privacy and dignity is really a huge one when it comes to multi-gen living. And then I don't even know what's possible. So I can't count the numbers of thousands of comments that I get on my content telling me like, hey, where do you even start? Like, how do we even, we talk about this, but we kind of get stuck. So I hope today I'm going to be able to give you a few tools to help families start to know where to begin the conversation and how to get unstuck, because being stuck is where I see a lot of families land. So of all the thousands of comments that I've read and emails I've received and conversations I've had with families, there are sort of like 4 areas that I see most people struggle with either one, you know, two, three, or all of these areas. The money conversation is huge. This is something that I've started spending more time talking about, and I have a couple other resources I can share with you about that. But what I found was when I started talking about how do you actually afford this, structure this, finance multi-generational living, people were like, tell me more, because this is where we get stuck. We don't understand as a family, like how we're going to combine resources, how we're going to structure ownership. You know, who's on the mortgage? How do you split the costs when incomes are unequal? What if one person wants to get out of it? These are all decisions that sometimes families make by default because they kind of fall into this, even, you know, during a crisis or an emergency. And those kind of situations, as you know, from working with older adults, often in crisis, create a lot of difficulties and challenges, but planning ahead can be really, really helpful to preventing the challenges. So, dignity and privacy is a big one. And interestingly, it is the older adult in the conversation that has the most concerns about this that I see. So, I think that oftentimes in multi-generational living, the older adult is giving something up. Maybe everyone is, but oftentimes they're either giving up their home to move in with family, build a backyard ADU, or if it's their home that's becoming the multi-generational home, they're giving up a lot of privacy and potentially some space. And the fear of loss of independence, loss of dignity, loss of privacy is a huge one. They also don't want to feel like a burden. They don't want their adult child to feel like they have to be a caregiver. So there's a lot of conversation that needs to happen around how the home can be designed to maintain independence, privacy, and dignity, but also how the relationships can be structured and the arrangements and the agreements between family members can protect those things. The sibling fault line. This is an interesting thing that comes up so often. So usually in a multi-gen home, there's one, and I admit in my family, there's one adult child who the parents are moving in with, or they're moving in with the parents. And there are often other siblings who are not technically living in the home or involved in that arrangement. And this brings up a lot of questions, concerns, and sometimes conflict, as you can imagine. Oftentimes, the conversations are around inheritance or potential future inheritance, legacy, financial, well-being. If the older generations resources are being pulled into the multi-generational living situation, sometimes that can cause family members who aren't living there to be concerned about what that means for them financially. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes some families are just like wonderful and happy that someone is living with their parents and they don't care, but that's not always the case, as we know. So I'm lucky, by the way. I live in one of those where my brother's just like, I am so relieved that mom's living with you. I don't care about the money. But the flip side of that with the sibling fault line is about other relationships too, where if you are the adult child living with your parents in a multi-gen home, you are the default caregiver. And if you're not asking for help, then you can definitely become overburdened with responsibility, and siblings and other relatives can assume that they don't need to step in. So a lot of communication that needs to happen in families around those kind of expectations. And then the last of these four sort of like buckets of struggles that people have is the gap between intention and action. A lot of families talk about this for years and never actually do it, even if it would be a great solution for them. They get stuck because they just actually don't know where to start. So this is where I'm hoping I can give you some tools for helping families know where to start, because really having a trusted professional to rely on to help them take concrete steps, one step at a time, as Erin likes to say at Dovetail, one manageable bite at a time, can help families get started going down the path and stop spinning in circles. So, what do multi-gen homes actually look like? There's so many ways that multi-gen homes can be constructed. I'll stick with our theme of four here and put them in four buckets for you because these are like the general categories. So, an in-law suite. Some families just add or, cordon off a portion of their home that's maybe a private bedroom, a private bathroom as a suite, hopefully on the main floor. That's usually everybody's goal so that they can avoid stairs. And this is a situation that can work really well, especially when an aging parent might need more care and more support. Maybe when they're less independent. So maybe they're not cooking anymore, so they don't need their own kitchen, or maybe they're not doing their own laundry anymore. They don't need a separate laundry. So an in-law suite is probably the easiest to obtain because it's the least square footage, the least complicated, the least expensive in terms of the actual physical real estate arrangement. But that doesn't afford a lot of privacy for families who are living independently in the same house but want some privacy and separation. An ADU, or an accessory dwelling unit, is you probably can't open like the news these days without seeing something about ADUs. In Massachusetts, we're lucky. The Affordable Homes Act that passed last year made ADUs legal all across the state with some guidelines. but made them much more accessible for families. People get a little confused with ADUs because they can be both attached and detached. I think when we talk about ADUs, most people think about like a backyard bungalow, a granny flat, a little tiny house in the backyard. Sometimes they're not tiny at all. My niece and her wife just built a 900 square foot ADU on her wife's parents' property that has a two-car garage below. So it's actually quite a lovely home, but it technically is an ADU. But an ADU can be like my mom's apartment, which is a full apartment in our walkout basement. So it's a beautiful situation because she has a ton of natural light and her own entrances, two entrances, her own patio. But it is within the structure of our home. So that is an attached ADU. Some people will transform a garage into an apartment or build up over the top of a garage. I don't love that setup. It doesn't often allow for great accessibility for the older generation, but sometimes people will actually swap houses. Sometimes, if the older adult owns the home, they will actually build the tiny house in the backyard or transform the garage into a smaller apartment or a small home and move there themselves and then turn over the bigger house to the younger generation of the family who may have kids and more people living in the home. Some older adults that I talk to actually love that because they get to stay on their property, they get to have the family there, but they actually get to build brand new and, kind of start fresh. Maybe they've never redone the kitchen the way they wanted to, and they finally get to have the white and navy cabinets and quartz countertops that they always wanted. Um, so ADUs, attached or detached, they can be many, many different sizes. In Massachusetts, for those of you who are here, the 900 square foot is generally the max. Although I just learned in Wilmington that you can go up to like 1,250 square feet with an ADU, which is pretty awesome. Not every town will allow that though. One thing to know about adding an ADU is that if you live in an area, especially that has private septic, septic is often a really prohibitive cost for families because your existing septic systems may not qualify for, like, may not accommodate the new build. And replacing a septic system can be really expensive, 30, 40, $50,000. So I have heard that, like, especially on Cape Cod, that a lot of the applications that were filed for building permits for ADUs are just not proceeding because once people got into the cost estimates, they found out they needed a new septic and they actually couldn't afford it. So something to be aware of for your clients. Dual primary suites is another trend. We're not seeing that quite as much here in the Northeast because, as you all know, here in the Northeast, we just don't have a lot of room to build. But in other parts of the country, especially like Arizona, where there's a lot more land and people are doing bigger developments, a lot of builders like Lennar are building what they call next gen models. And those next gen models typically have like dual primary suites. By the way, I just spotted that this says master suites, which I don't say. I say primary suites. So I'm going to correct my slide. But dual primary suites would mean, you've got two nice big bedrooms with en suites in the home, either, one on a second level, one on a first level, or sometimes both on the first level. And sometimes they're even built with also a small sitting area, maybe even like a mini kitchenette. Those can preserve dignity and privacy. They're not as separate and as private as the specific ADU, but they do offer a little bit more than just having like one extra bedroom with a bathroom. One thing that I have noticed a big trend of is people using those homes for long visits. So if like your family lives across the country, but they want to come and stay for weeks, months at a time, or even somebody's going through a medical procedure or surgery and they need time to recover or something and have people in the home taking care of them, those models tend to be a great one for long visits for family and friends. And then lastly, a renovation or a conversion. All of these things we just talked about could be a renovation or a conversion, but there's just many ways that people can sometimes adapt their home. Maybe you have a second living area. Maybe you have like a living room and a family room. Maybe your family room isn't a part of the house where, oh, geez, if we just put some doors here and added an extra bath, or we turn this half bath into a full bath, then maybe we could make this into living space. So this is often the most affordable path, but it requires that you have sort of the right bones to your house to do it. I feel like I'm talking a lot, so I'm going to pause for 1 second and see if anybody has any questions at this point. Feel free to
Feel
jump in
free.
or,
Yeah, I was
or
just say jump in, unmute yourself, raise your hand, put it in the
yeah.
chat, Julie, I just wanted to say what I've seen with a few of my friends who are thinking potentially multi-gen, this dual primary suite situation, like they're trying to look at traditional homes that have a lot of square footage, but to your point, one feels like they're giving up on having that primary suite and someone has to
Yeah,
take the other one. I love that like two real ensuite primary
yeah,
suite situations. And it's interesting that there's builders that are focusing on this
there are.
and
Yeah,
building that in. It's great.
yeah, yeah. We'll definitely see more of
Well,
it.
I love that. Please feel free to ask any questions. Also, quick reminder, if you are in need of a CSA CE, please just put your name in the chat. So at the end, I can easily pull who's all here till the end. Thanks, Paul. Um, and Julie, feel free to continue on, but if anybody has any questions, we'll answer them as we go or at the end. Thanks,
Yeah,
Julie.
absolutely. Of course. Okay, so I did want to spend just a minute talking about why, as a CSA, you have an advantage here in working with these types of clients. Like, I really hope that CSAs become more interested in multi-generational living because I think that we are so well positioned to be such a great support. Because what's happening, so because I'm a real estate agent, I talk with a lot of other real estate agents. I do a lot of referrals across the country to real estate agents for multi-generational living. And I'll share with you why that's good and also problematic, and why I'm constantly creating new solutions for how to support families with this. So, because I have a big national platform, a lot of people reach out to me for support with multi-gen living, and some of them need real estate agents. And what I know is that there are not many real estate agents who are equipped to really support them with the complexities of multi-gen living. Unless they also happen to be a CSA, where I think we have a big advantage because we've already learned so much about the complexities that older adults face. So what I end up doing is I refer out to real estate agents across the country, and then I stay in the mix as a coach to support the family through the multi-gen side of things. So it's like I supplement the knowledge of the local real estate agent on the CSA side, on the multi-gen side, so that I can ensure that those families are getting the support they need. But the truth is, we need more real estate agents and more professionals in every industry who understand multi-gen living so that, you know, I'm one person. I can't do that for for everybody. We need more people able to do this. But as a CSA, you already understand aging. You get the physical, the cognitive, the emotional progression of aging. You can spot those things that might be, if there's an early cognitive diagnosis, the are you going to build something in the backyard that you think your mom is going to live in, or does she need to be in the house, right? Like there's so many different things that you need to think through that, just the general professional doesn't understand, but you do. You speak caregiver language. You understand that adult children driving multi-gen decisions are often feeling overwhelmed, guilt-ridden, time-starved, and you can hold space for those conversations because you've had them so many times. You understand financial realities, retirement savings, Social Security, care costs, estate planning. I had a terrible situation that came up, not with a multi-gen client, but a former client of mine about a couple weeks ago. I won't get into the details of it, but essentially, without reaching out to me, she had a serious health problem, was in rehab for an extended period of time, and someone who she thought was a neighbor and a friend brought her an offer for her home, and she sold it with no other conversations with anyone who knew what they were doing for way less than it was worth. But worse than that, she didn't bring an estate attorney into the picture. She didn't protect her money. She could have put her money in a pooled trust to protect for her for the future. And essentially, she lost everything. Like she just has to go, she has to drain all of her proceeds from the sale of the home to pay her mass health bills with no protection for her at all. And she doesn't even know where she's going to live. So it's so, you all know as senior advisors, it is so dangerous for people to be in those situations without the right people there to support them. So the financial realities that families have to be aware of, especially with their aging parents, you've got a leg up on everybody when it comes to that. You have the trust relationship. Your clients already trust you with their most sensitive conversations. Adding multi-gen living to that conversation like isn't a huge stretch. It's really a natural extension of what you can do. You see the problem before it's urgent. If we're lucky enough to encounter our clients before a crisis hits, that's the best time to explore all of these housing options when there's still time and choice and people have bandwidth for it. And finally, you can build a referral bridge, partner with other professionals who also understand multi-gen living to create really a full service ecosystem for your clients. Or if you become the one who understands multi-gen living, you can help fill in the gaps for the other professionals that are in these clients' lives. Excuse me, just a sec. So I'd love to talk about, let me just check time. Oh, we're good. The three layers of multi-gen support that professionals can provide to families who are exploring multi-generational living. So we'll talk about the emotional layer, the financial layer, and the logistical layer. Hmm. Sorry, I'm just getting over a cold. A little throat clearing going on here. Okay, the emotional layer. As you can imagine, there's a lot going on when families are thinking about moving in together, back in together. And I really think that this is the area that most professionals, probably not CSAs, but other professionals really like underestimate what families are carrying and where most of the trust is built in the conversation. So as you probably experience with your clients all the time, when families approach me about multi-generational living and exploring the idea, it is normally a situation where I need to encourage them to just slow the whole thing down. So, especially when you're in real estate, I think people come to you thinking, I need to buy a house, I need to sell a house. And, Aaron and I worked so many situations like this together, and we're like, okay, but where are you going to live? Let's talk about where you're going to live. Let's talk about what you want the next stage of your life to look like. There's so many times that we have to slow this down and get people to really think about, what it is that they want. I'm going to skip to the second bullet here because I think it's so important. Building a shared vision, not just a shared home, is really, really important in a multi-generational family. Um, the arrangement brings so many different hopes, fears, needs for everybody. And those needs and hopes and fears can be in conflict with one another sometimes. One of the places I see this come up a lot is in location, because oftentimes someone in the mix is needing to relocate. And that means not just leaving their home, but leaving their community, leaving their schools, leaving their church, leaving their job, leaving their friends and their neighbors and everything that they've built up that's part of the structure of their life. And sometimes people even think like, Erin, actually, I think of you because when you first got married, I remember that you and Tommy bought in a place that was kind of like in the middle of both of your families. And that almost ended up being worse than being near one or the other, right? So, like,
Yeah,
say
and we
something
hear
about
that so much. Yeah,
that.
and we hear this so much with older adults, like, should my mom move in between both of us? And I'm like, you really have to think about who's the most involved. So I married into a really large, for my husband's first generation Italian. We would get together with them at least 3 nights a week, and we were driving all the way up to them. And I realized for the 4 times a year I would see my side of the family, it didn't make sense for us to live in between both. So
Yep.
yes, ultimately we moved closer to my husband's family.
Yeah.
But yeah, we didn't know that until we had that experience. That's a
Yep. I
perfect
think about you a
analogy.
lot when I have these conversations because that does
Yeah.
happen, right? People are like, well, it'll be fair. Let's be halfway between everybody. But then you're kind of near no one. And so oftentimes that's something that families are really grappling with. You can really, help your clients think about what's an honest picture of like, what does success in a home look like for every person? And what does togetherness mean? Togetherness in a multi-generational family can be completely different for each person in the family. So someone might come into it thinking you're having dinner together every night, and someone might think we're just going to pop in occasionally. And those kinds of expectations really need to be defined ahead of time. I will tell you the people who've shared stories with me who were unsuccessful with multi-generational living, it was almost always it was because they didn't talk about expectations ahead of time and they ended up in a lot of conflict because one part of the family expected one thing and one expected something else. Navigating family conversations before they become conflict is an area that you can really help with when you're working with your clients. The families that skip the hard conversations, that don't talk about money or caregiving or privacy or expectations before people move in, really are the ones that can struggle a lot. One thing I like to encourage people to talk about, and this has really resonated. So I host these monthly multi-gen coffee chats. I have like this toolkit, and people who buy it can come to these coffee chats. It's been great because it's usually like a small, intimate group, and people really support each other and share really deeply, like how this process is working for them or not. And one of the things we talked about that really resonated with people is this idea of non-financial contributions. Because oftentimes in families, one generation has more money than the other, but also oftentimes one generation has more physical capacity or energy, or good health. That can mean someone may not have as much money to contribute to the family situation, but they may be able to take care of all the landscaping and do all the grocery shopping. And so there is really a way that families can look at non-financial contributions when they're coming into agreements with one another. I will also say there's a way that people avoid that conversation altogether and end up in a really sticky situation. I've had clients come to me that had their kids moved in because they wanted to help them and never really set any expectations for what was going to be the expectation when the younger adults career got more established, or their finances started picking up. And it's a thing, I think, with older adults sometimes that we they don't always share with their adult kids what the reality of their financial situation is. And young adult children can often think their parents are doing better financially than they realize. I don't know, there's something about, I don't know how old you are when you start to realize, like, oh, my parents' money isn't going to last forever. Like, they're not working anymore. And so these conversations need to happen before hopefully the multi-gen family moves in together. Otherwise, it can get real sticky. Defining ongoing roles and responsibilities. We talked about some of that. Resentment and tension in multi-gen homes can almost always be traced back to unspoken assumptions about who's supposed to be doing what and what everyone's financial contribution should be. I will share that even in our home, where we had so many conversations, we had everything in writing, we had everything legally structured, we had so many great conversations about how it was all going to work. There was a time, well, when we moved in, we had sort of like a 5-year plan, then it turned into a 10-year plan. And about a year ago, we had to revisit the finances around that plan because expenses of running this house were increasing. And my mother had no problem with having that conversation and changing her financial contribution. I, as an adult daughter, found out that I had a problem bringing that up with my mother because I had this sort of like unspoken idea that I was supposed to take care of my mother. And I was reluctant to like have an honest conversation with her about needing her financial contribution to increase in order to maintain the house. So even like knowing these things need to happen, still as a person living it, it can be a struggle sometimes. So being able to help your clients navigate that is important.
Julie, can I chime in on this one? I have an interesting multi-generational client situation now where it was over 30 years ago, the deal that was made. So, older adult agreed to transfer ownership of big family home to adult daughter,
Yeah.
with the agreement that she would take care of her eventually in that home until end of life. So this is long standing. So child ends up raising her whole family is now out, there's grandchildren. But now that the older adult is 91, full-time in the home, she is receiving some assistance. Older adult said, until end of life. But to your point, like the ongoing roles that change. So when I asked the adult daughter, like, what is the motivation here? Like, where are the challenges that this may no longer be working for you? And she was like, well, if my mom can't navigate the stairs, that's like the adult daughter's non-negotiable. Like if my mom can't navigate the stairs, this deal doesn't work. And I was like, does your mom know that that's the piece or the cry? And she's like, no, we haven't talked about it. So then when I
Hmm.
asked mom, before obviously they came together to have that conversation, like, what is your non-negotiable? Like and she's like, nothing. The deal is that I'm here until end of life and we would make whatever
That's the
work.
deal.
That's the deal. There's no like caveat in there. So to your point, like it's been 30 years since that conversation was had. It's
Yeah.
ongoing. Things change and you have to continue to have these
You
conversations.
have to continue to. Yeah, it's funny because my husband's family, I won't get into all the logistics of it, but end of life means a lot of different things. And my husband, we're going to Brazil this month to visit my husband's family because his grandmother is turning 100. Her money was running out. Like they had to do a whole bunch of reconfiguring around her living situation with the family because she was living a really long time. So when you say end of life, you don't know what you're talking about. Could be 80, could be 105. Like we don't know. So those conversations do have to continue. And I do want to say, it's funny when I was having a conversation with my niece who just is moving into this multi-gen situation with that ADU that I mentioned she built. And we were talking about these things and all the things, they were talking about in their family about, stuff they had to think about ahead of time. And she very wisely also said, at some point you do have to acknowledge there's no way that you can talk about everything that might happen, which is why having the lines of communication open and continuing to have conversations is really important. So I know some families that will have meetings, annually or twice a year about like a check-in. How's this working? Anything need to change? Do we need to adapt our expectations? And I think that's really smart. I put estate planning essentials under this emotional layer because it really belongs under the logistical layer, however, and even the financial one. However, talking with families and encouraging them to make sure that they have all this work done is hugely important. I would say referrals to estate planning attorneys is like the number one thing I recommend, like to every single person I talk to, because most families don't have it all worked out. So wills, powers of attorney, healthcare proxies, ownership structure, every adult involved in the situation needs to have all of these things in place and talked about before they're combining their finances and their households. And then connecting families to the right support team. I guess I just said that. Like I am constantly recommending that people talk to an estate planning attorney, particularly an elder law attorney a lot of the time, a financial planner, a real estate specialist, a trusted advisor who can help you put this all together. And we all know having those in our network is a huge part of how we can support our clients better. It's a team. It really is a team effort to make sure all of this comes together successfully. So ways you can lead those conversations with clarity and compassion. I think as we all know from working with older adults, patience is our number one asset here. Like we've got to be patient. These conversations can take a long time. I always really try to center the relationship as the most important thing. It's funny sometimes because I talk about multi-gen living so often, people will like come into my comments on social media and say things like, it doesn't work for everybody. And I'll say, it doesn't. It absolutely doesn't. Just because I'm a fan of it doesn't mean that I think it works for everybody. And if you're someone who knows that you cannot live with your mother, I'm going to tell you, don't do it. Like, do not do it. Do not kill the relationship just for the sake of like thinking this is a good idea. I think naming what's true is really important for families. Just acknowledging that this is a complex decision and that most people do feel underprepared for it can help provide some relief to your clients that they're not the only ones that are finding the process of this a little overwhelming. Normalizing the conversation, acknowledging that if they're coming to you at any point in an advanced planning state, they're actually great. They're ahead of the curve because so many people wait for a crisis. And then creating a support team for them can also be really, really helpful. So you can make introductions to other professionals who can be part of the team. Okay, the financial layer. There's so many layers to the financial layer. I'm going to talk just sort of quickly, high level about the beginning of that, like how people can make the multi-gen home happen. I have a QR code I'll share with you later. I'm doing a free multi-gen financing workshop next week. And that I think it's designed for consumers, but as professionals, if you'd like to attend, just to expand what you understand about it, you are so welcome to join us. A lot of people think they have to get a conventional mortgage. Some families, that's a great solution for if you have, good credit and some savings to do a decent down payment. If you're buying a new multi-gen home together, a conventional mortgage can be the way to go. But there are other products like, for the self-employed, bank statement mortgages can be helpful. If you're a veteran, a VA loan can be a great way to go, especially if you have more than one veteran or military member in the family and generations because VA loans are assumable. You could potentially have a parent get a VA loan, have an adult child assume it if they're also a veteran or military member. Um, Accessing equity in an existing home is a big way that people finance these things. So reverse mortgages can be really helpful here. I'm helping a family with a really complicated situation in Florida right now, sell two houses and buy a new house and access a reverse mortgage because there isn't enough good credit in the younger generations to qualify for a traditional mortgage and also buy a sibling out of the inheritance of one of the houses in the same transaction. It's going to be a great case study. This is going to, if we pull this off, it's going to be a great case study. But a reverse mortgage was literally like the only financial tool that was going to fit that exact situation. HELOCs, home equity lines of credit, cash out refinancing, these can all be powerful tools. And they can fund renovations, they can fund ADU builds or a new purchase entirely. You could do a reverse for purchase. But a lot of people are selling like one primary home, cashing out of that to build into the next home, but sometimes they need to access a little bit more in terms of like a construction loan or a HELOC on the house that they're building on in order to pull all the tools together to do that. Because if you build an ADU, a detached ADU especially, you can easily spend three or $400,000. Like people are surprised sometimes at how expensive they are, but it can be quite an investment. And then just to give you an idea on costs for an attached ADU, you're probably talking $150,000 to like build out a basement, depending on how fancy you want to go. Family financing arrangements can be helpful. Contributions to down payments, family loans, shared appreciation agreements, but they need to be really structured. All of this needs to be structured really carefully so everybody is protected. It's worth mentioning that ownership structure is a big one, and people oftentimes don't understand that being on the loan and being a title are two different things. So there needs to be conversations about like if there are loans, mortgages involved, whose names are going to be on those, but those could be different. That could be differently structured. There could be people on a title that were not on the loan. So all of that needs to be discussed. And then different ownership structures, like are you going to be tenants in common? Are you going to have joint tenancy? Is it going to be a trust? Are you going to have an LLC? You can structure ownership in a way that not everybody has an equal percentage of, depending on what their contributions are. But all of that you have to go talk to an attorney about and make sure you talk about it ahead of time and that it feels fair. Some decisions that people cannot afford to skip when they're exploring multi-gen living, who goes on the mortgage, who's on the title, is a parent's contribution or anyone's contribution considered a gift, a documented loan, an equity stake? As an example, my mom didn't want to own a house. She gifted us money towards the down payment of this house 11 years ago. And we, in our family conversation and in writing, documented that as the equivalent of 5 years of rent, which is why that was originally a 5-year plan that turned into a 10-year plan, and now she's making a bigger contribution to. How will major expenses and unexpected costs be shared? Sometimes this is related to ability to pay. Sometimes it's related to ownership of the house. In our situation, my husband and I are the beneficiaries of the equity build we have here, so we pay for the house. Like if we want to upgrade the front walkway, that's ours. Like we invest in that. My mom will pay for some other things, like she had some extra railings installed when walking became difficult, and then she'll contribute to those things. What happens if a family member wants to exit? Like somebody relocates or gets married, or, what does that arrangement look like when it ends? Or when they bring, I didn't even write this down, but when they bring new people into the mix. What if a girlfriend or a spouse wants to move in or an unexpected child? That does happen. Like, what is that going to look like? You need to help your clients be able to talk about it. All right, our third layer is the logistical layer. So the right home is a big conversation. And this is the one that people love to talk about because we like to dream about where we're going to live and what this could look like. Issues that people should be thinking about: privacy, accessibility, flexibility, adaptability. Sometimes those things matter more than the actual size of the home. Most families don't need a perfect home, but they do need a thoughtful home. So separate entrances can be really, really helpful. Enough parking, first floor accessibility, and spaces that can evolve over time can be really helpful. Because, like, as we know, like kids get bigger, they need different kinds of space, or maybe they go to college and then you can, reshuffle people around the home if your needs change. A written financial agreement is really, really important. You need to make sure you document contributions, ownership percentages, shared expenses, exit terms, anything that you've agreed to. Verbal agreements become resentment. Written ones become peace. Having everything in writing is the biggest gift you can give to your family. Sometimes people don't like to take that step to get there, but they realize that just having it done gives everybody a sense of a peace of mind. Legal documents for every adult, like we talked about, wills, power of attorneys, healthcare proxies, everybody needs to be current, not eventually, not, oh, we'll do that next year. No, do that before you move in together. And then a plan for when things change. Life changes. Caregiving needs increase. Look at Erin's example of mom feeling like, hey, there's no exit strategy here. You are here taking care of me. And the daughter's like, you can't go up and down the stairs. I'm out. So, like, those kind of things need to be thought of. Adult children will launch. That's the situation we're in our home right now. Our kids have both launched. Our daughter, visits a lot. But we're just here in this big house with my husband and my mom. But it works for us for now. But things do change. Parents pass away. That's something to think about if you've got siblings involved in inheritances. All those things should really be talked about ahead of time. A successful arrangement has a framework for navigating change.
Julie, I just wanted to chime in quick because no matter how much I think I know about all of this, when you said like people get excited to look at houses, here in Wilmington, a beautiful multi-gen came on the market. And even I fell into the trap of like, oh my God, this would be perfect for my in-laws and us who are aging and whatever. And I had to quickly remind myself that my 10-year plan is to get
Yeah.
out. When my little
Ah,
one
okay.
is
Yes.
out,
Yeah.
I'm out. So
Yep.
like I even got the bamboozled, like the dreaming of the beautiful, but
Yeah.
that's not going to work. That's not in alignment with what I want my future to look like. And then I would feel tethered and stuck with the in-laws. But I just wanted to,
Yep.
people do love to dream and sometimes forget about those other logistics.
100%. That's such a good story. Yeah, that's such a good point. So how can you help guide families around the multi-gen conversation when it comes to either just getting started or just, thinking through these logistics? So, asking where you're living right now and does this feel sustainable? This is something actually I feel like I learned from you, Erin. Like, what's like beginning with the conversation of like, well, what's working well? Like, what is working well about where you currently live? Because a lot of times we like to think about like what's not working. But getting into what's working well, even if that means that like sometimes that means you're going to decide to stay someplace, but sometimes that means you're going to notice the things that are working well so you can figure out how to recreate those things in the new space. Have you thought about what happens if your care needs change? Is your family part of your housing plan or are those conversations still in the future? Have you explored what it might look like to live closer to or with family? What feels like the biggest obstacle to making a change right now? Because that could be different for everybody, right? Erin's example is perfect for that of a mom and a daughter seeing things different ways. Some people might say, I will guarantee you, this is actually one of the things that come up a lot. Like the parent might say, oh, I don't want to lose my privacy. Like that might be the biggest obstacle for them. And the adult child might say, like, I don't know if we can afford this. Like, I don't know if I can, make the mortgage payment. And then would it help to talk with someone who specializes in exactly this kind of transition? I'm available for that. I do free clarity calls with families just to kind of like help them start the conversation and see if we can figure out what a path forward is and connect them with resources. So you can always reach out to me about that. And I have time for questions if anybody has them. I also have some resources and QR codes. So feel free to scan or screenshot this and scan it later, or I can, have Erin send it out if she's doing follow-up. I have resources. I have a free multi-generational living guide. I have a couple of paid resources, my toolkit and my money guide. But if you just scan the QR code on the left, it'll take you to all my multi-gen resources. If you would like to learn more about financing multi-gen living, you're welcome to join me for the workshop on the 14th. I'm doing that. Some of you might know Michael Penkow. He is also a certified senior advisor. He's a mortgage specialist. He's one of the smartest people I know about reverse mortgages. We will talk a little bit about reverse on that. We'll be doing a separate reverse seminar soon, but you're welcome to join that. And then if you're interested in continuing this work, I am building resources and a network for professionals who want to specialize in supporting multi-gen families. And you can just scan the QR code on the right. That'll just put you on my mailing list for information about that. And I'll be sharing more about that soon, and we can keep in touch that way. So I would love to
Thank
answer
you,
any questions you might
Julie.
have. Yeah, you're so welcome. I hope this was helpful. I'm so curious if any of you are running into these conversations with your clients already, if it's come up.
I'd love to hear from if anybody wants to unmute. I'm actually when I think back how many of these kind of scenarios without realizing,
Yeah,
in client cases that it just
sure.
organically was the situation and that's the other thing. Some people end up in a multi-generational living environment just organically over time
Yeah, they
without
move in
realizing
because
that.
somebody needs help or somebody needs some financial support, and then it just continues.
Yes.
Yeah, totally.
Well, thank you. Um, oh wow, Nancy, more than half of my clients were over the age of 65. I dealt with it often for them, or their parents. Financial planner. Yes. Also, if you're not on any of Julie's mailing lists, she's not spammy, she's not salesy, but she does have a lot of quality content. So I encourage people to stay in her sphere if you're into education. Hi, Carol. Um, okay, thanks. Carol, if I'll talk to you on the side. Were you here for the full program? Um, Mother and a husband lived out of state. What a hassle. Yes. Angela, it was a delicate conversation for sure, but one that needs to be had. I think that's the other thing, Julie, if you can talk, we have just a couple of minutes left. This is
Yeah.
why having a non-biased third party
Yes. Yeah.
sometimes navigate these conversations, if you want to talk about that, can help stabilize the emotions a little.
Oh my gosh, so true. Because sometimes anyone in the mix, whether it's like, the adult child, the sandwich generation person, adult daughter, or the older adult, like sometimes just having someone to talk to who's not emotionally involved in the situation is so, so helpful. It's actually why a lot of people come to my coffee chats, I think, because they want to just talk to other people who are like dealing with these things. To be honest with you, one of the things that surprised me about that is it's usually the older generation that's coming to these coffee chats. Like they're the ones that I think it could partially, I think it's because they have more time, because oftentimes they're retired. So they are able to like make the time in the middle of the day to come to a workshop or a conversation together. It's not always that, but also I think they're the ones who, well, the wisdom of age, right? They kind of can see all the things that might be coming down the pike, all the ways in which it might be hard to live with their grandchildren and watch their parents, watch their children parent their grandchildren in ways that they wouldn't do. And so they're really giving a lot of thought to what the complexities of that could be, and just having somebody to talk with that's not going to be the person living in the house with them can be really helpful.
Or when you made the comment about like it can be 300 to 400,000 to build a detached ADU in this area, you can't find a condo in that
No, you
price
can't.
point. So like even though that seems like a large financial lift, if you're selling the long time home to make that a reality, it's a great financial investment.
Yeah, that kind of works on both sides. Like, so for the downsizing parent who's selling a house that they've built equity in over time and they have the cash to do that, that can be really appealing. And then also for like my niece and her wife, they were qualified to buy a home between like 450. They could find nothing that wasn't falling apart. And now they have a beautiful, small-ish, but a beautiful brand new home. And it was enabled them to have such a better home than they would have been able to afford on their own.
Yeah. We have a question from Carol. Sherry, thank you for your feedback. Last question. Carol said, very nice session, Julie. Is there any comparison between the multi-gen family living back that we previously knew in like the 1950s and 60s compared to now? Are we getting back into that style of living, or are we talking something different?
Yeah, this is such a great question. So yes and no. So yes, in that we're coming back around to multi-gen living, right? Which became something unusual in the United States, not in a lot of other countries in the world, but in the United States over the last 70 to 80 years with suburban sprawl, people going off to college and moving away from their families. I think even post World War II, boom, suburban build, like that all contributed to families kind of spreading out. So yes, in that sense, the financial realities and the aging population realities are driving families back towards multi-generational living. So it's a new idea that's actually a very old idea. However, I would say we have a very different idea for the most part of what space and home looks like now than people did in the 50s and 60s. And like as an example, the one thing that came to my mind when I saw that question was I sold a house for a client of mine a couple years ago, and it was like a 3 bedroom, 1 bath, 1,200 square foot house. And she grew up in it with 6 brothers and sisters. And that seemed totally normal to them at the time, and it was totally normal. And now most of us would think like that is impossible because most of us, grown to expect larger spaces. The other thing about that is I do think the space issue is a big one in people's expectations. I attended like a half day conference on multi-generational living that I'm not going to say it right, but it's like the Joint Center for Housing at Harvard
Yeah.
put on a couple weeks ago. And there was a woman researcher there who was sharing data about how long like multi-gen homes lasted among lower income families. And it wasn't very long. It was like 2 years on average. But the reason I think for that, she shared a little bit about it, and I wish there'd been a little more data, was that in most of those cases, people were on top of each other due to financial constraints. And so multi-gen living looks very different when you feel like you don't have enough space than it does if you do
Yeah,
feel like you have enough space.
that
So I
makes
hope that kind
sense.
of answered your question, Carol. I think yes, we're getting back to something that's helpful, but no, we're not, most of us, emotionally equipped to live in the kind of smaller spaces that people did many years ago. And that's not a judgment, it's just an observation on like what we've all become kind of spoiled by, to be honest.
Right. Well, thank you, everyone. Keep an eye out. I'll send a follow-up email. I'll send your CEs and then I'll promote for next month. Thank you for your time, Julie. Be
Thanks for
well,
having
everyone.
me. It
Go
was so
enjoy the
fun.
sun. It's a
Yeah, I'd
pleasure.
love to hear from anybody if you'd like to keep in touch.
All right. Thank you. Bye,
All right.
everybody.
Bye, everybody. Take care.
This was fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks
Leon.
for being here.